You're listening to the Fanalist Podcast. Follow on Twitter at TheFanalystPod.
UFC Fight Night Las Vegas taking place this Sunday, Tyson. What can fans of the UFC expect from this fight card?
Yeah, it's an awesome one. A lot of young, talented prospects in the lower weight divisions. A lot of great matchups as well. It's going to be an exciting one for sure.
Okay, well, the UFC has their fight card. We've decided to create our own, Tyson. You have 4 fights that really stand out to you that you want to talk about. Let's start it off with Aljamain Sterling and Brian Caraway. What can people expect from this bantamweight face-off?
Yeah, it's a great contending fight because on one hand, you have a young, talented prospect in Aljamain Sterling, who's number 4 in the world, and it's very rare that we call a number 4 ranked fighter a prospect, but just the fact that he's so young and he's only 4 fights in the UFC, I mean, I consider him a prospect. And then you have a veteran like Brian Caraway. They've kind of had this weird rivalry over the last few years where one another have kind of gone back and forth at each other. But I'm really interested in this matchup because you have 2 guys who are very talented submission artists who have a good background in wrestling. Aljamain Sterling, a young guy who gets the finishes. Brian Caraway, who's kind of been back and forth the wins and losses. This is a really good test for Aljamain. So far, he hasn't really fought anyone to the level that Brian Caraway is at. So this will be a good test for him to see if he's at championship level.
Okay, so you're saying Aljamain, he's kind of known as a bit of a prospect, even though he's ranked 4th. What is it about him that keeps him kind of at that prospect level? Is it just a lack of experience? Has he not had enough fights?
Exactly. Lack of experience, really, against like top level contenders. I mean, Brian Caraway is going to be his toughest fight. That's just the bottom line. And a guy who's number 8 in the world being his toughest fight, I consider that a prospect, you know what I mean? And just the idea that he's been able to get to the number 4 rank spot is pretty surprising to me, but he's shown number 4 level. And it's just, can he produce that type of stuff against a guy who has the experience of Brian Caraway?
Right now, he just needs to really get those fights, right? As time goes by, he's going to really start to earn that title.
Exactly. If he beats Brian Caraway, I will no longer consider him a prospect. I will consider him a top contender in that division, a guy who's at least a fight away from getting a title shot.
Well, I guess he's going to finally fight somebody his own size when you're looking at it that way and try and earn that number 4 ranking. How about Sarah McMahon and Jessica Eye?
Yeah, this is a battle of 2 sort of veteran fighters who have had their ups and downs, and lately it's been downs. Both fighters are coming off 3 losses in their last 4 fights. So this is sort of a do-or-die situation for both of them. Jessica Eye coming off her loss against Miesha Tate last year. McMahon coming off the loss in her fight. It's sort of an interesting matchup because if one of them loses, I just can't see them coming back. And this is where, if you're in the women's bantamweight division, this is your time to shine because no longer is there Ronda Rousey destroying everyone and one champion just dominating the division. You have a chance to really get to a title spot, a title contending spot. So a win for either of these fighters will easily kick them up to being in the top 5. A loss, they're pretty much down the road where they're just not going to have any shot at all.
So you could almost look at it kind of like a wild card game getting into a playoff scenario where it's do or die. You really have to win this one. But if you win this, you're going to move on and play the elite competition. You're going to really have an opportunity to get a lot of space in that bantamweight division.
Exactly. And this, like I said, this is the time to do it because right now you have a whole bunch of contenders who have fought Ronda Rousey who nobody wanted to see a rematch between McMahon and Rousey because Ronda really just dominated her and there wasn't need for a rematch. Now you can fight Holly Holm, you can fight Miesha Tate, whoever has the belt at the time. If you put yourself in a winning streak, and this is a great way to start the winning streak off, you definitely have a chance to get that title shot.
Well, the stage is set. McMahon and I will have to see which of them really take that next step and just grab the bantamweight division by the throat. How about Renan Barão, the former bantamweight champion, up against Jeremy Stephens in the featherweight division?
Yeah, this is Renan Barão's featherweight debut, and he's coming off 2 losses in the bantamweight division, both title fights, where he was holding the belt against Dillashaw, then he lost it, then in the rematch he lost again. And he's had struggles making that weight for years. So this was sort of a long time coming, and I'm very interested in seeing how he does in this higher weight class where he's fighting a guy who's larger than him. Jeremy Stephens, a former lightweight fighter who knocked out the current lightweight champion. He has that power. So it's very interesting to see if a guy who's maybe smaller than the rest of the featherweights fighting a guy who's bigger than the rest of the featherweights. It's going to be a test for sure. I have him stylistically favored in this matchup, but just because Jeremy has that size advantage, you can never count him out. He's proven time and time again that he's able to knock out these guys who people consider better than him. And that power usually doesn't translate well against guys who are as stylistically great as Renan Barão, but in this particular case, I feel like he might have a slight advantage.
So what's going through Barão's mind as he's coming off failing to defend his title back-to-back fights, or fighting to get it back, really? What's going through his mind as he steps up to the featherweight division to take on, like you're saying, a guy who's bigger than him?
His whole career, he's been able to dominate fighters. People considered him for a long time to be one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world, one of the best pound-for-pound Brazilian fighters of all time. So when you get dominated like he has in his last two fights, it's going to be very interesting to see how his confidence shapes out. Jeremy Stephens, he's a longtime veteran, and he has that ability to one-punch knockout, finish a fight in one punch. And Renan Barão, he doesn't have that same power that a guy like Jeremy Stephens has. So it's going to be a difficult test for him. Like I said, I haven't favored stylistically, but Jeremy Stephens has the ability to finish this fight off.
As you said, Renan Barão, we'll see if he can step up to the featherweight division and take down the featherweight veteran Jeremy Stephens. Now, let's wrap it up with Thomas Almeida and Cody Garbrandt in bantamweight again. The third bantamweight on our card, definitely something you're looking forward to this week, is the bantamweight fights. Who do you give the edge to in this one, Almeida or Garbrandt?
This is one of the most anticipated fights I've had coming into this year, where it's very rare that the UFC makes this type of matchup because both are very young prospects. They're undefeated. They have great potential to be in a UFC title fight and later on in their careers. So usually we see these guys fighting for the title or in a title contending situation later on, like 2 years down the road, rather than now. But this is such a talent-rich division where they can afford to kind of lose a prospect, I guess, or just give them a slight bump in the road on the record. So I have Almeida as the favorite in this one. First of all, he has more experience. I think I favor him standing up. He's probably the best striker in the division, but Cody Garbrandt isn't that far off. He's a great kickboxer. He's got a background in wrestling. I don't think that he can really top Almeida in that, really. I think Almeida's defense is too good for Garbrandt to take him down and have his way with him. But either fighter can really knock the guy out. It's just that simple. Garbrandt, I would not be surprised if he came out with the victory, but I like Almeida and his chances of getting closer and closer to the belt.
You mentioned how they're both younger prospects, and you don't usually see two guys like that go head-to-head so early in their careers. Is it even more fascinating that they're both undefeated? Does that just add to the unlikelihood of seeing this type of matchup?
Absolutely, because that's more marketable, right, if a guy's undefeated. And, I mean, Cody Garbrandt, he's definitely a marketable young fighter, so to risk him getting a loss on his record is kind of interesting that the UFC is willing to take that risk. And Thomas Almeida, he's ridiculous. I mean, his record, 21-0, it speaks for itself. Every fight is pretty much a knockout. I believe he only has one decision on his record. So a loss will definitely prevent these guys from getting to that title shot in the near future, but a win can definitely skyrocket them. So it's a very rare occasion that this type of thing happens.
Like you just said, a win could really skyrocket them. So with Almeida, what does a win against Garbrandt do for his career?
I say it puts him about one fight away from getting him a title shot, because the bantamweight division right now is very interesting because you have Cruz fighting Faber in a week for the title, and then it's pretty much assumed that the winner of Dillashaw versus Assunção gets the winner of Faber-Cruz. And then if Dillashaw loses to Assunção, what happens to Dillashaw? If Cruz loses to Faber, which I don't think will happen, but if he does, what will happen to Cruz? We'll have to see another rematch, possibly. You know, it just shakes up the entire division these next couple of weeks. So it really depends on how other fights shake out. I could see Almeida, if he knocks out Garbrandt, having a top contending fight against Aljamain Sterling, who's also on this card, which is why this card, adds to the fact that this card is just unbelievable.
a classic ladder fight, right? Where if you win this one, you really start to skyrocket up. If you lose this one, it really sets you back. So we'll see if Almeida or Garbrandt can really take that next step up the ladder in this division and try and find themselves, a contending fight in the near future. Thanks for listening to the Fanalist Podcast. Make sure you head over to YouTube where you can find all of our podcasts archived, as well as some of the more recent ones on SoundCloud. You can also follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, all that great stuff. Thanks for the support, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning into the Fanalist Podcast. I'm Andrew, and you can follow us at TheFanalystPod.